Axios has some new reporting on that call between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president reportedly lashing out at Netanyahu during expletive-laden conversation. That's according to U.S. officials. And a third source briefed on the call. According to one U.S. official, Trump told Netanyahu he was effing crazy and that the prime minister would be in prison if it were not for Trump, likely referring to the Israeli leader's years-long corruption trial. The president adding, quote, "Everybody hates you now. Everybody hates Israel because of this." That's the president of the United States. A second source briefed on the call said Trump was, quote, pissed and at one point yelled at Netanyahu, quote, "What the F are you doing?" One of the U.S. officials told Axios that Trump felt in recent days Netanyahu was escalating in a disproportionate way. Another U.S. official said Trump also was concerned by the fact that Israel had killed so many civilians in Lebanon and objected to the Israelis knocking down buildings to take out a single Hezbollah commander. Let's bring in one of the authors of that report, White House reporter for Axios, Mark Caputo. Mark, take us inside that call a little deeper, if you would, and perhaps just explain a little of President Trump's frustration that the Israeli prime minister's military campaign, particularly in Lebanon, is threatening and perhaps preventing a negotiation that might bring this war to an end.
Well, leading up to this over the weekend, my colleague Barak Ravid and I had written a story about Trump sending back an edit, an addition to a peace deal with Iran, and they were hoping to get an answer in a few days. And in the course of reporting that out, we were told by the administration, by administration officials, that Israel, that Netanyahu wanted a component concerning Lebanon in there, and that Trump had rebuffed him, thinking that that was just sort of an added feature that would have sort of bogged down the talks. And then the next day, this massive bombing campaign erupts. And from what we're told, in Trump's mind, they felt that this was Netanyahu sort of saying, well, I'm not going to get my way. I'm sort of going to bomb my way to your attention. And it really, really bothered President Trump, we're told. And yesterday in the early afternoon, Trump got him on the horn, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and just lit into him and sort of let him know that this is unacceptable in Trump's view. Now, let's be clear. The president keeps thinking that there's going to be a deal with Iran, and it hasn't happened yet. But in the administration, there has long been this sense of, OK, Netanyahu is our partner in this process, but a lot of the things that Netanyahu has said and done haven't been as conducive to getting the outcome they desire, and in some cases has managed to bog the conflict and conflicts down in more conflict.
So, Mark, yesterday Iran said they're going to cease any sort of talks with the U.S., direct or indirect, because of what's happening in Lebanon. So take us inside the administration as best you can with your colleagues' sources. Where does the Trump team now view those negotiations? Where could they go from here? What sort of, not concession per se, but how do they get them back on track? How do they even get Iran to the table?
They claim, and President Trump had said on Truth Social yesterday, and again, it's a claim. We don't have an ability to verify these things, that the talks are still going on, that things are still happening. And perhaps one of the reasons they made sure that the story got out there is they wanted to broadcast to Iran that they're serious about the deal. The bigger problem that the United States has in striking this agreement are the details. As I say, the devil's in the details. And bottom line is that Iran wants money. And President Trump doesn't want the appearance of giving Iran money, of paying them money. So we had described in a story a few months ago about sort of a cash for uranium deal, and the president sort of overrode his advisors who were talking about that at the time to say, well, sort of no money is going to change hands in any way, shape, or form. Well, now we understand that behind the scenes that is happening. Part of this, therefore, is going to be President Trump deciding at what point does he allow Iran to have access to some sort of money. There are frozen accounts, billions of dollars, to begin this process and to free it up. Until then, though, it looks like we're just in this Cold War cycle of, going back on agreements, not having a true peace deal, and having a hot war or conflict occasionally flare up. Because until Iran gets its money, from what we're told, it doesn't really want to make a deal because it wants security and it wants some sort of recompense for the damage. And there was a lot of damage that was inflicted on Iran by the United States.
And the Wall Street Journal editorial page this morning suggesting that Iran is playing Donald Trump here, using Hezbollah to keep Israel in the war and therefore prevent these negotiations, or at least give them an excuse not to negotiate. Mark, you've been very busy overnight and this morning. Some of your reporting as well on President Trump now planning to scrap that $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund. That's what they're calling it anyway. It was intended to compensate people who claim they were victims of unfair prosecution by the government. That's according to a senior White House official speaking to MS Now. Since its announcement, the fund has received bipartisan backlash, with critics describing it as a scheme to reward Trump's political allies with public benefits, perhaps including people who attacked police officers on January 6. Two people familiar with the matter tell the New York Times President Trump had been leaning toward backing off the fund for days. The move comes after the Justice Department stated yesterday it would abide by a federal judge's temporary order not to proceed with any steps to launch that fund until at least June 12th. That is when a hearing on the matter is scheduled. But one issue remains unclear, whether getting rid of the fund will affect another part of the legal settlement in the case, namely, if it provides Trump, his family, and his businesses with immunity from current and pending IRS audits. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said Democrats will push a bill this week to ban the fund permanently, arguing Trump's verbal assurances mean nothing. Mark, you reported this yesterday. MS Now matched your reporting on the story. This is obviously a deeply unpopular idea, and one of the few times we've seen at least members of the Senate in the Republican Party push back pretty loudly on an idea of President Trump's.
They say in politics when you're explaining you're losing, and it's almost impossible to explain this $1.8 billion fund, just the details of it, which was the president would be able to appoint 5 members, there would be no say from Congress, and how this money is essentially appropriated and expended, and there were no clear details as to what the process was for doling out the money or who qualified. So, yeah, it's a very difficult thing. Also, in the administration itself, there's just been a lack of understanding of just how this came about. The president's personal lawyers, including a man named Boris Epshteyn, who's a longtime close advisor, and the Attorney General, Todd Blanche's office, it wasn't Blanche himself, have a close relationship. Blanche used to not only be the private attorney for President Trump before President Trump was reelected, but also for Boris himself. So the DOJ and Epshteyn had come up with this deal and the particulars of it. Some members of the White House and the West Wing say they were included. Others said they weren't. So there were some people saying they were completely blindsided by that. So not only did you have the Congress against the White House, you had portions of the White House just saying we didn't know anything about this, and they weren't able to get any clear answers. Not a great way to get anything done, and the result was finally President Trump, from what we understand, was told, look, I just can't go forward with this anymore. He's got a lot of things on his plate. We just discussed a huge one. And in the end, this just wound up being just a big distraction. Now, let's be clear. In our story, the sources we talked to said that this is dead for now. I think for now is an important word because President Trump does believe that government was weaponized against a number of people, and some of those people are very close friends of his, and they do want some sort of remuneration or recompense. And so I wouldn't be surprised if some form or some measure like this or some sort of fund came back, but it would probably have to be more in the sunshine so you'd have less opposition.
So, Mark, what's your sense from your reporting? There was a lot of discontent among some members of the United States Senate towards the fund. Sure. John Thune, in particular, said something that indicated he was not in favor of it. But do you think that this is a start to opposing Trump being able to stand up and say out loud, I don't like this, or is this a one-off?
I can't say either way. I mean, the Republicans in Congress have looked at the prior primary results where President Trump has taken out sitting members of both the Senate and of the House in Republican primaries. He's very popular. He has a big stick. He walks loudly and wields a big stick. And so they are scared of him. There are certain things that they just can't eat, and this was one of them. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis. President Trump's decision to endorse Ken Paxton over John Cornyn, the sitting senator from Texas, really rankled a lot of Republican senators the wrong way. So there were a number of factors that are involved here in this opposition that you're seeing rise up from the Senate. And then, of course, overlaying all this, unpopular war in Iran, $5 gasoline. It makes the political environment really challenging, to say the least.
And Willie, just to underline what Mark said about this fund is gone for now, there are some Democrats in the Senate yesterday, though heartened by this news that Trump is abandoning this at the moment, but said that there were the DOJ language around it had some wiggle room, that this could be revisited, that yes, DOJ was walking away from this idea for the moment, but they do have concerns that it could come back in the months ahead.
President Trump does not like to concede defeat, so we'll see if he finds some way back to this.